Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Modupe, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. And how are you?
I am fine, good to see you.
Absolutely, good to see you too.
Wonderful,
Catherine,
and I can see Martin is here as well. Martin, how are you?
I'm fine, but they have stopped me from being on video. I don't know how Modupe managed.
Victor, can you sort out Martin? We want to make sure that he's not pulling a, so and so issue on us. Martin, did you receive my email yesterday?
I did, yes. So I'm not going to get up from my seat.
Okay.
Dr. Bitangendemo. Okay.
No, I can't start my video. Somebody has stopped me.
Victor, are you able to allow Martin to use his video? Victor, are you on?
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Martin is not able to start his video. Is it something you've disabled from your end?
He's on video, we can see him.
No, I can't.
No.
Yeah, he's on video. I can see both of you.
I can't see Martin.
I can't either.
What?
Hello,
I just see.
There he is.
He thinks Modupe is Martin.
Oh, it's
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Yes.
Maybe you guys look alike, eh?
Sorry, Matt.
I think that's more a compliment to me.
I can't start this video at all.
Then maybe Martin, do you want to log off and relog in? Maybe it will come with the functionality. Because the option for your video, starting your video, is at the bottom.
He's gone off, so maybe he'll try and log back in.
Catherine, I'm back.
Oh, great. Oh, phew. Now let's see whether you look like Modupe.
Hi, Ashinu. Hi, how are you? No, how are you back? You immediately had to start by getting our back. But I should be coming there. Yes.
Hi, Catherine. So,
So a very good afternoon to you all. And thank you so much for joining us for this webinar this afternoon. For those of you who joined us the first time, this is the second in a series of webinars organized by the Governance and Leadership Committee of KEPSA. And so on behalf of the Governance and Leadership Committee of KEPSA, karibuni sana. As you will no doubt know, that the two strategic objectives of the Governance and Leadership Committee are first, to improve institutional governance, to improve the practice of ethics and transparency, for accountability within the public sector as well as the private sector. And secondly, it is to improve Kenya's competitiveness and ease of doing business. And so it is our hope that this series of webinars can be used, or we shall use this series of webinars to share with you as our members some important lessons in leadership and governance, which of course are critical elements for successful businesses. So before we kick off, and our chair is held back slightly. He was meant to start us off, but he had an earlier meeting with some government officials, and so he may be held off. Allow me first and foremost to introduce our two panelists. And I will start off with Dr. Martin Oduor-Otieno, who I know needs no introduction to many of you. However, just allow me to say a few words about Martin. Martin is an independent business advisor. He's also an accredited executive coach. He's also a governance auditor and a founder and CEO of the consulting firm, the Leadership Group Limited. Martin, as many of you will know, had an illustrious career at KCB Group between 2005 and December 2012. And most of that time, he was the CEO, presiding over rapid transformation and growth for the bank. Subsequent to this, he was a partner in the professional services firm, Deloitte East Africa. And Martin has also had a stint in the public sector. I need to hear stories from him about service in the public sector. and he was the permanent secretary within the Ministry of Finance and National Treasury between 1999 and 2001. Martin is also a fellow of the Institute of Certified Secretaries of Kenya, and is also a fellow at the Institute of Directors. He is a non-executive director in a number of blue chip companies, including EABL, where he serves as the chairman of the board. When we were preparing for this webinar today, I asked Martin, what is your favorite leadership quote? And Martin did not hesitate in saying, every leader needs a coach. And perhaps during this webinar, he will share insights into why that is his favorite quote. Welcome, Martin. Allow me also to introduce Dr. Modupe Taylor-Pierce. He is a Sierra Leonean scholar and practitioner of leadership and organizational management. He has a passion for leadership development and education, which was born out of his experience as an officer serving in combat in Sierra Leone. He is an alumnus of the Capella University, where he took a PhD in leadership, organization, and management, Cornell University, and the United States Military Academy. Modupe currently serves as the CEO of Breakfast Club Africa, which is a Pan-African CEO membership organization, and he is the founding dean of the African Leadership University School of Business. He is very passionate about Africa Rising, passionate about the success of business within Africa, the success of African leaders. And so when I asked Modupe what his favorite quote was, he said, leadership is cause, all else is effect. Wow. So ladies and gentlemen, let me hand over to our two panelists who will speak for around about 30, 40 minutes or so. And thereafter, we shall have a plenary for about 45 minutes. And we hope to close this session at 3:30 p.m. And before we close, hopefully our chairman would have joined us and we will allow him to say a few words. So over to you, Martin and Modupe. As they go through their sessions, please do feel free to use the chat function to send in any questions. We will also allow some of you to ask questions directly. And so I want to hand over to you, Martin and Modupe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all on this call. And thanks to KEPSA for inviting Modupe and I to join you this afternoon to share with you some of our experiences and also to hear from you and learn from you on this call as well. Modupe and I have got one thing in common, that we both belong to a leadership forum called Breakfast Club Africa, for which Modupe is the CEO and founder. And on that basis, I'd like to hand over to Modupe to take this reign first, and then I'll follow after him. So Modupe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm so pleased and so honored to be invited, and thank you to Catherine and to the chair and to KEPSA board for agreeing to have me here with you, sharing some of my insights. And as Martin said, I certainly hope to learn as much from you as perhaps you might learn from us. And I'm particularly excited because Kenya is definitely one of the places that I call home, because I did do some schooling in Kenya and lived in the Karen Langata area many moons ago. But I'll leave that for a discussion for another time, since you probably did not tune in to hear just about my high school days. Today we're going to start talking, Martin and I just decided we're going to really share about our perspectives on leadership, especially with resilience and resourcefulness. And I want to take you back to one of the times that really stamped the importance of leadership in me. As Catherine has alluded, my career started as a combat officer. And I still remember, one of the days, that stamps in my mind is 24th November, 1994. While, I was a combat infantry officer in the Sierra Leone Army during the Civil War. It was the worst day of my life because it was the day that I had to bury 4 young men who had died as a result of friendly fire. They were part of an infantry assault company that had been led by a drunk captain on a rainy night out of their assigned assault zone into a zone that had been designated for another company in the same battalion. The 2 groups ran into each other under deep cover of night, and believing that they had encountered the enemy, they opened fire on each other. By the time I was able to intervene via radio, I was the battalion commander, 4 young men were dead. Sadly, this did not include the drunk captain. These young men died because of bad decisions made by their leader. I learned that day that in wartime, when leaders fail, people die. 7 months earlier, I had been happily ensconced in the relatively comfortable confines of the United States Military Academy at West Point, getting ready to be the first Sierra Leonean to ever graduate from this storied academy, full of amazing training in leadership and military tactics. At West Point, we learned about resourcefulness and resilience, and it was embedded in many of the conditions we were made to face. 2 months after graduation, I was in the middle of a battlefield in a civil war in Sierra Leone, where I was forced to be resourceful and resilient. I was given a unit of men whose skills at even shooting straight were rudimentary at best. And that was when they were sober. Yes, the Army, in its infinite wisdom, supplied highly concentrated alcoholic drinks as morale booster to the soldiers. Then we were given wide areas of territory to conquer and defend, and were supplied 0 rations and told to live off the land. We had to find ways to feed ourselves and yet avoid alienating the villagers whose lives and livelihoods we were there to protect and defend. So I established a small team of my own version of special forces, a group of 5 young soldiers in whom I invested hours of time and training to teach them everything I knew about infantry combat, including night warfare, fields of fire, signaling, trench warfare, infiltration, low crawling, and yes, shooting straight. I trained them like my life depended on it, because it did. We got to know each other deeply and developed trust in each other because of the hours of training spent together. The time I spent in preparing and equipping these young men for success in combat paid off. 5 out of 6 of us survived the Civil War, despite a couple of us catching a few bullets. 5 years later and a couple of surgeries later, as I alluded to the bullets that I caught, I was back in the United States working for a company that specialized in turnaround consulting. As a junior associate, I was part of a team that was deployed to companies that were experiencing significant decline and facing bankruptcy. Our mission was very basically to turn them around. A consistent theme that I found when we investigated the reasons for these companies' decline was that it always came down to decisions made by the company leader, and the turnaround sometimes involved replacing the company leader completely. After a few years of doing this, it was obvious to me that these companies, some of which we were unable to rescue, were victims of poor decision-making. I learned during that time that in business, when people fail, when leaders fail in business, people lose their livelihoods. In talking to these leaders, these company leaders, I became convinced that they were not stupid. Neither were they secret agents for their company's competitors. You know, they didn't wake up in the morning, each morning saying to themselves, let's see how I can screw up my company today. But they were misinformed, unaware of their own shortcomings, and making poor decisions from a place of good intentions. Many of them lacked the resourcefulness and resilience that was crucial to success, especially in turbulent times. It was during this stage of my career that I discovered leadership coaching. A decade later, I was installed as the leader of a small logistics company that needed a turnaround. This time, I was no longer a junior associate in the team. I was the team leader who had replaced the former CEO. I sought out coaching because I knew that I would need help to be successful, and I joined a group of CEOs who met regularly to learn from each other and solve each other's challenges, and received coaching from the group chair. It was the best decision I made. And 3 years and many trials and tribulations later, this struggling company became profitable, and I eventually left. I learned that I needed help to be resourceful and resilient, and thankfully, I found it. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Modupe. What a story. What a story. I've had this story before, actually, because I met Modupe about 4 years ago, three years ago, the time of our last elections here, I think 2017, 2016. And he will tell the story of Breakfast Club Africa himself. But Modupe had this great idea about growing leaders who are intentional about their own growth across the continent, believing very much that, as he says, without leadership, institutions and individuals cannot go very far, cannot get anywhere. In fact, as he says, poor decision making leads to death, as in the case of the 4 young men he's just spoken about. And so when we launched Breakfast Club Africa here, which he'll talk about later, he told us this story. And I think you've cut it a bit short, Modupe, because, and maybe you're going to come back to that, because I'd really like you to tell that full story. So one of the things that I picked up then, and I continue to reflect on from Modupe's story is courage. The fact that leaders must have courage, and that without courage, we cannot then practice any of the other virtues that we as leaders talk about. We cannot be kind, we cannot be true, we cannot be merciful, we cannot be generous, we cannot be honest, because all these things, all these virtues require courage for us to implement them. The other point that Modupe has made is a point about coaching, and I want to pick up that because after my executive life in both KCB and Deloitte, which many of you will know about, I continue to reflect about how I can spend the rest of my life helping leaders to grow and become better and better, whether they are in the private sector, public sector, or as individuals. And indeed, I went in and enrolled for training as a coach. And today I'm qualified as a coach, and I do coaching. I do executive coaching. I focus mainly in the space of leaders like yourselves, CEOs and the C-suite level largely, but across different organizations, SMEs and and large corporates, etc. Currently, I'm the president of International Coaching Federation Kenya chapter. ICF is the largest coaching organization globally, with more than 30,000 coaches in the world, and operating in hundreds of chapters across the world as well. ICF defines coaching as a process of partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. So coaching, as distinct from the traditional leadership of which is directive, do that, this is how this happens, is a partnership between the client and the coach. The belief is that each and every one of us has got resources, and what coaching does is to unleash those resources in each and every one of us, so that we can then realize our potential. What I find, and which is why I decided to talk about coaching at today's session, is that in our part of the world, coaching is not well developed at all. In fact, when I talk to leaders, that is the last thing in their minds, because we grow up in our areas of expertise, and we rise up the ladders and become CEOs and become board chairmen and board members, and things kind of just happen. If I look at the Western world today, I find that virtually every leader has got a coach. And that's why when Catherine asked me, what's my one quote that I would like to bring up, it came obvious to me that every leader needs a coach, but that is not really well developed here. Why do I say that every leader needs a coach? I think it's because as leaders, we go through a lot of stress and challenging situations, and certainly at this time with COVID, leaders are stressed in many ways. Leaders are stressed because business is down, the economy is not performing. We are looking after, many staff members whose livelihoods depend on you, whose families depend on you. Without business, you cannot perform. People are being laid off and declared redundant, let alone just the stress that COVID brings, the fear and the uncertainty around illness, around possible death, etc. So when we look at all that, and you as a leader, you find that your head is literally full with all these stressful circumstances. Even in good days prior to COVID, and in better days when all the graphs are going up, leaders deal with situations where they've never been before. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's coming around the corner. Over the last 10 years, we've all been talking about VUCA, and we thought it was a theoretical concept, but certainly COVID brought it right down to our doorsteps, all those components of it. We think about where we want to take our company, where we want to grow our organizations, whether we are SMEs or whether we are large organizations. There's always some lingering thought about something missing in us. We think about culture in our organizations, and we find, that culture is a big thing. Without the right culture in organizations, we cannot drive our strategy. And again, we are on our own in that thought process. We may be having our exco teams around us, but we also begin to have doubts in our minds. Can my team really, is it really up to it? There's the old saying that goes that it's lonely at the top. Leaders find it lonely at the top. When I conduct my coaching, one of the things that I try to demystify is that concept of being lonely at the top. You can only be lonely at the top if you want to be lonely at the top, if you choose to be lonely at the top, because leadership is a choice. And so these are all questions that coaching help us to answer. There's also the question of trust in organizations, because again, we find that without trust in organizations, it is difficult for us to move forward and for us to build high-performing teams, which we really need. And so when I look broadly at coaching, what do I find? I find that coaching can help you see things from a different perspective as leaders. It can help you understand where you are personally and where your organization is and where you want to take your organization. One of my very, very successful coaching opportunities and clients a couple of years ago was an individual who came to me and was running a fairly successful business, but he had something like 20 people reporting into him in the organization. And when I asked him to get up and draw on a chart, you know, how these guys reporting to him, he drew all these 20 guys. And then I asked him, okay, so just look at that and tell me what you're seeing. And he said, you know, these are too many people reporting into me. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, now I understand why I'm not very effective, because every day each of these 20 guys is walking into my office and asking me to make one decision or another. And I said to him, so what do you want to do about this? He said, actually, I think I can cut this down to a very small number. Anyway, it's a long story, but out of that one session, he went away, restructured his organization, had sort of about 7 people reporting to him. He came back next time around and he was all smiles, and I asked him, why are you smiling so much today, my friend? And he said, you know, I've never had such time to think strategically in my life. Now I do, because, you know, I've cut out a lot of some of the noise that was. So that is one around just understanding where you are and where your organization is. The other one is, we spoke about courage. Coaching can help you find the resources to become more trusted, more compassionate, more courageous as a leader, and be able to make the right decisions. Not to mention the question of just stress, resilience, which is the topic of our conversation today. Having a person that you can bounce off ideas with from time to time, but also just gaining control and confidence in what you do. And therefore, you know, if I go back to my corporate life alone, I do reflect today, and I find that, you know, one of the specific areas where if I were to unwind the clock and go back, I would really look for coaching is to help me in the space of stakeholder management. Because I find that as I grew up and as I became CEO and as I ran the different organizations, I found that I started from the point of view that actually I'm quite competent in what I do. I know what I do and I can do it well. And therefore, just leave me, give me my space to do what I'm doing. I realized that actually I could have done better by you know, managing lots and lots of my stakeholders much, much better. And if I had a coach at that time, it would have helped me, and perhaps I would have achieved slightly more than what I achieved in my corporate life. So Modupe, I just wanted to bring that intervention in and just make a connection between your story earlier and coaching, and the way that I see that coaching can impact and have powerful, can enable leaders to have powerful impacts in delivering the organizations. Let me come back to you, Modupe.
Indeed, Martin, thank you. And, you know, I'd like to share, I'll share a bit of sort of how, you know, in terms of utilizing resourcefulness and resilience has helped me this year during the COVID, because I don't know about everybody else on this call, but you know, COVID turned my world upside down. So, you know, in last year, 2019, Breakfast Club Africa, which Martin has talked about, we organized the Made in Africa Leadership Conference in response to a gap we saw in the market for a learning conference for African CEOs, where, you know, CEOs, we can find solutions to the challenges that impede the growth of our companies. We held it in Rwanda last year, and for our first conference, it was pretty successful, you know, about 70 people. And, you know, based on that, we planned MLC, as we call it, Made in Africa Leadership Conference. And we planned MLC 2020 to be in Accra in June 2020. By January, I mean, all the plans were in place. We were taking registrations. We had the hotel booked. We were lining up guest speakers. In February, COVID struck. By March 2020, we realized two things. Number one, this pandemic was not going to allow us to hold the conference in June in Accra. And number two, the economic challenges created by the pandemic made growth an even bigger challenge than it was before. In other words, CEOs needed our help even more during this pandemic. So, there we were in a bit of a quandary. Everybody's saying, let's cancel, we should cancel, postpone. Everybody else was postponing. And yet we knew that the purpose for which we created a conference was even more material at this time. And we decided we could not abandon CEOs in their time of need. And we would organize this conference as a virtual conference. We made this decision in early April, 10 weeks before the scheduled date for the conference. And frankly, at that time, our team knew almost zero about virtual conferences. But, we did our market survey, we reached out to experts about it. And when we did the market survey, for pricing, we realized that, the competitive landscape was favorable. In early April, first week April, the only other conferences around were in-person conferences charging between $500 and $2,000 registration fees. And most of them, frankly, were getting canceled. So we would be well placed if we made a conference that charged between $100 and $350 for registration fees, including a freemium option. 4 weeks after we had announced to the world that we were switching to virtual conference and marketing our heavily discounted prices, the bottom fell out of the market. The market was flooded with free conferences. We found ourselves with a plethora of guest speakers and coaches ready to facilitate these learning experiences for CEOs, and the CEOs were refusing to sign up. Thankfully, I have a coach. I called my coach. I ranted, I raved, I moaned about how nobody knows the trouble I have been through to put together this conference. These ungrateful CEOs of Africa do not realize how valuable this offering is. And now look, I'm about to suffer deep embarrassment and disgrace because the conference will be a flop. My coach listened carefully and then asked me a few uncomfortable questions. How did you get here? What are your options? What responsibility do you feel about the outcomes of this conference? What are you afraid of? What are you willing to give up to make this conference successful? I have to tell you, I hated the session and I hated the process. Eventually, though, through the coaching, I came up with a plan. I swallowed my pride, bottled my fear, and I reached out to all the guest speakers and I said to each of them, I need help. Then I reached out to each of our coaches and I said, I need help. I also reached out to God and said, I need help. Thankfully, help came. The turnaround was amazing. In the week that followed, our registrations tripled. The team banded together. Guest speakers nudged their contacts to register. And by the start of the conference, we had delegates. The conference was a success. 300 people attended, and the feedback was amazing. They said it was an amazing learning experience. One of the CEOs, said they were able to find solutions to certain problems that they were having. Another one found over $1 million of funding that they had been looking for. Another one found contacts in order to expand her business in food processing. and was so excited and telling me how they are going to make sure that the post-harvest losses in their home country are becoming a thing of the past. In our after-action review, the organizing team attributed the success of the conference to the team's collective resilience and resourcefulness. I think back about, some of the well-meaning advice I had from people back in April that said, Modupe, perhaps it's just better if we just counsel and plan this for next year. There's no shame in that. Everybody is doing it. And when I think about the journey we've gone through today, I realize if we hadn't demonstrated the resourcefulness and resilience, there are hundreds of CEOs who would have made less optimal decisions today about their business because they hadn't had those learning experiences. And I thank God that I had a coach who helped me to bottle my fear, swallow my pride, and make the right decision. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Modupe. And to that last point that you're making, research shows that actually, although coaching may appear to be a very intangible thing when you look at it and think about it, there's actually an ROI that you can attach to coaching. And as you say, in your space, coaching enabled you to come out of that fear and the frustration that you are going through, that the MLC may not happen. And the impact of that has been realized by other people, seeing the connections, the networks, the business growth, and some of the solutions that came out of that. Now, how you measure that is something that perhaps we need to have some of our research experts help us to do. But some of the research that has been conducted and reported on by PwC in the past actually show that ROI for companies investing in coaching was something more upwards of 7 times the initial investment. And in fact, for about a quarter of the companies that were surveyed, the ROI was 10 to 49 times of the initial investment. So actually, one can be mathematical about it and bring in that. I wanted Modupe to, just before we open it up for discussion, just to dig in a little bit around COVID in the context of this resilience that we're discussing. It's clearly the strategic paradigm shift in thinking and in planning and in doing things by leaders has had to change completely, including holding webinars such as the one that KEPSA is holding here. Traditionally, I suspect, Catherine, that would have been sitting in a hall somewhere, having lunch, and then having a guest speaker, and then going through the motions, etc., etc. Now we can do that from the comfort of wherever we are. We can get a guest such as Modupe all the way in Sierra Leone, in Freetown, to join us in this conference. But just looking at some of what the experience is, we are all disoriented by this whole COVID stuff and where we are. I mean, we are still in this kind of semi-lockdown here. Technically, we cannot get out of Nairobi or Mombasa, although I see a lot of motion on the roads. But theoretically, we're supposed to be all working from home. The economics, I've made reference to what has happened to the economics. Leaders are reflecting deeply as to how they will make it beyond today. I sit on the board of Kenya Airways, Catherine and I sit on the board of Kenya Airways. And for the last 4 months, all our planes are on the ground. And therefore, as a leadership in an organization like that, whether you are in the board or whether you're in management, or whether you are in staff, it calls for real resilience and to be able to move forward. And I'm quite pleased with what I see in that organization in terms of the way that management is picking up from where they are at the moment. But that's a different story that we can talk about. The disruptions in our social lives. I haven't been to my office more than 4 times in the last 4 months. And I've discovered that I can actually achieve almost as much as I used to achieve by sitting inside my house, which is where I am right now. But what is true is that what has worked in the past will certainly not work for us in the future. And so when we talk about resilience, this is what we are talking about. If we look at some of the trends in leadership, therefore, the impact of technology, of innovation, of digitization is something that that for us as leaders, whether you are in corporate, in large corporate, small corporate, is something that is critical for us. And I believe that all of us know that. Before COVID, not many of us, as Modupe says, knew about all this virtual stuff. The pace of change is very, very fast. Speed is really critical. I was reading an article in Business Daily yesterday, which was written by Joshua Egara of KCB in memory of the late Bob Collymore of Safaricom. And one of the things that I read in that piece was about attaching purpose and meaning to organizational performance. And that in times such as this, part of resilience comes from the fact that people want to associate with organizations which have a purpose, are very clear on their purpose, and focus on purpose rather than on the money and the profits that are there, because that will carry them forward. And therefore, as we talk about resilience, being very clear about what our purpose and the meaning of our organizations are is quite important. The other element is around talent. This is the time that we are looking at, the new talent landscape. Remember that many people have been working from home, and you don't have the comfort and the luxury of going around the hall and looking at who is working and who is not working. So how are you building resilience in your talent? How are you building trust in your talent that will ensure continuity even beyond? And what about the whole ethical leadership and ethical framework and the morality around the workplace? And transparency, because again, people are looking to see leaders who are transparent, who are telling them the truth. Times are hard, so tell us that, don't hide that away from us. Let us all work together and see how we can get out of this together. And I think, Modupe, that as we think about resilience, these are some of the things that for me come to the core. I was at the MLC, at Modupe's MLC conference 2 weeks ago. I think it was last week or the week before, and we were I think was the right word for it, privileged to have one of our own, Ambassador Dennis Awori was one of the guest speakers at the MLC, and I picked up some thoughts from him around transformative leadership, which I want to share with you. Dennis' perspective on this, and I don't know if he's on this call or not, but if he is, then I thank him for giving me some of these thoughts. Dennis' reflections on transformative leadership talked about leaders who recognize and embrace the digital era, including rapid change and speed of innovation, which I've made reference to. He also talked about performance, leaders balancing performance, profit recovery with a focus on sustainability. So again, as we talk about resilience, let's not forget about the sustainability angle. He also spoke about leadership that works with the teams to identify the needed change and to execute this through dedicated team members. And the final point that I picked up from Dennis was around leaders embracing agility and accountability, being accountable. Now, these are and rethinking about their business models. So, whether it's e-commerce, vis-a-vis home delivery, or whatever was happening before, and also accelerating digital systems. So as I think about as I think about the place for coaching, I see that coaching can actually help and support leaders across all these avenues. And I'd like to, in closing, just invite all of you as leaders, whether you are in large organizations or small organizations, to see how you can make coaching, embed coaching as a culture in your own organizations, and that through that be able to experience some of the benefits that come through that. Just to mention in conclusion here that as part of the International Coaching Federation, yesterday we were actually having a meeting with an organization called Invest in Africa, which has a membership of 2,600 SMEs. And what we are trying to do is to get into a coaching collaboration where ICF and ICF coaches can actually help support the SMEs, the 2,600 or whatever number of SMEs, to see how they can get better and better in their leadership and thereby be able to grow into the next large corporates of this space. So just to share that it's a live discussion, it's a live subject, and it's part of the resourcefulness, because coaching is a resource that we as leaders need to bring up as we journey towards resilience. So Modupe, back to yourself.
Thank you, Martin. I'm conscious that we have some questions, so I'll weave some of my responses into answering some of these questions. You know, one of the blessings in disguise about COVID is that it has shifted the earth under us and has fundamentally made consumers or people, all of us, reprioritize the problems that we want to solve. And for many of our companies, we find ourselves in situations in which we find our products and services being, prioritized differently, whether it's because of the affordability or it's because of the accessibility in the case of Kenya Airways, or it's just in the case of, or it's because, frankly, of other factors. But as leaders, we are forced to face our deepest fears, which is that our products and services may no longer be as relevant as they were. Or maybe they're much more relevant and now we have different kinds of problems. And what that speaks to is that we have to be the ones that lead our organizations through the process of change. And change involves getting over fear. And that fear is the fear of failure. The fear of, will I cut it? Will my company be able to produce it? Will I be the right leader for this new type of service that's needed? And part of that is where we have to, as leaders, be inwardly resilient and resourceful to say, let's go. Let's fail fast, fail forward, but let's go. And we have to also have those really honest conversations with our people to let them know that we're afraid too, because they're afraid. And when people are afraid, and they're allowed to give in to the fear, they invest some of their time and talents in covering that up versus actually focusing on the mission. And this is where, to answer, John Nganga's question about how do you show empathy without looking weak? One of the myths about leadership is that you have to look strong. Guess what, folks? You're the leader, okay? They're not going to depose you. You have the title, so you're already the leader. Trying to look strong as the leader is like, trying to prove to my wife that I'm her husband. She said I do 21 years ago. I'm pretty sure she remembers it. So, forget that. It's really about showing them that you're committed to getting there and you're committed to taking care of them. When the people that you serve as leaders, as a leader, believe that you know where you're trying to go. You may not know how to get there, okay? But you know where you're trying to take them, and you're committed to taking care of them in that journey. Then they will be willing to entrust their time and talents into you. So vulnerability is a good thing in leadership. And it is countercultural to some extent. And to some extent, that's probably why the statistics do show that female leaders outperform male leaders. We've seen it in crisis, COVID crisis. Look at countries, it's happening. Look at companies, it's happening. So, and part of that is because in our sort of cultural DNA, the women find it easier to be vulnerable than the men, but it is a good thing. And I say that as somebody who's a reformed vulnerable person, because it is still difficult for me, especially being a former military officer. I have to learn that it's okay to say to people, I need help. Because here's the truth, folks. Everybody around you knew you needed help anyways. So that's important. Okay, I'll pause here. Martin, perhaps you want to look at some of the questions or ask some other things.
Yeah, I see a question from Leah. How can you be friendly and apply seriousness in leadership at the same time? I'm not sure actually about being friendly. I see leadership as a process where you're using all the tools at your disposal to inspire teams, to bring people together, to set a clear direction and to lead the teams to achieve those results. And so, you know, one of the concepts that that I came across in the last few years is the concept of adaptive leadership, which is leaders really using the strengths of their teams, but leaders also being reflective, stepping back, looking at what's going on and coming back and being part of that, part of the discussions and the actions that are going on in the organization. Being friendly does not necessarily mean that you don't drive the organization to achieve results, right? Being serious does not necessarily lead you to achieve the results that you want to achieve in organizations. And therefore, setting the right leadership style is important for you as you move forward. Once you define clearly where you want to go, as Modupe says, and how you're bringing the teams together, the kind of culture you're building in the organization would be important. So I would look at your question probably in a slightly different way. You know, one of the other tools that we use in coaching, especially for the assessments, is one that asks the question, what do leaders do and how do they do it? And what they do could be either strategic or operational, and how they do it could be forceful. The axis stretches from forceful to enabling, right? Now, there will be times when you need to be forceful and use that as a style to get something. But if you stay in that corner for too long, something is going to suffer, because your people are probably looking for an enabling leader who sets the right climate, the right environment for them to thrive. And so the versatility of a leader is important, how you move through across that axis. And that's where I would place that comment to your question, Leah.
Thank you very much, Martin, Modupe. Wow, very insightful lessons indeed. What has stood out for me is poor leadership leads to death. And that death might not be people dying, it might be the business dying. I just want to let participants know that you're free to raise your hand if you have a question or a comment to make to contribute to the discussion today. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and so that you can contribute. Perhaps Modupe or Martin can respond to this. When we think about leadership, what sort of conversations should we be having today that perhaps we were not having before, given the pandemic?
Catherine, one of the conversations I think we could be having today is the importance of finding solutions in Africa. You know, if there's one thing that this pandemic has taught us is that, you know, there are certain things that are important to be able to produce for ourselves. And there's also certain levels of resiliency that we can build by looking at our region. The amount of trade within our bloc is anemic. And I'm always amused by the fact that, you know, we are touting the Africa Free Trade Agreement as something that's going to create trade. And don't get me wrong, I think it's fantastic. But, you know, China didn't have to sign a free trade agreement for them to be sending millions of containers from China to Africa. Okay, business people created that. And, you know, we have a wonderful opportunity. I've had the privilege of traveling all over Africa, and I am amazed at how much I see solutions to a problem that I see in Kenya, and I see the solution in Ghana, or I see a problem in, you know, Malawi, and I see the solution in Ethiopia. And, you know, it just feels like if we can just connect with each other more and be intentional about it, because really, you know, the direction and of a company is largely determined by the company's CEO. So, you know, if you are intentional about growing into other areas, whether it's growing from a market standpoint, from a supply standpoint, from an employee standpoint, then it will happen. And if you're not, it won't happen. It's as simple as that. So I think the conversation needs to be on how do we make our companies and our businesses benefit and gain from the advantages inherent in being Pan-African, both in terms of our supply, in terms of our employees, in terms of our boards, in terms of our customers, our markets, because there is huge benefit to be gained from that. And I'll close with this little pet peeve. You know, I love chapati.
Welcome back to Kenya.
Thank you. But I'm in Sierra Leone. I go to Sierra Leone and Ghana. I cannot find chapati in a supermarket.
You can make it.
Okay. But, well, true. My wife will tell you about my culinary skills. But, you know, in West Africa, we make excellent jollof rice. And I'm sure some of you who have traveled know that. But when you're in Kenya or Malawi, you cannot get jollof rice. Why is it that we can get Nestle's coffee or Cadbury's chocolate made in Europe, but we can't get jollof rice in supermarkets all over Africa? Why can't we get, you know, whether, you know, you name any other food that those of you who have traveled know that you really enjoyed, but you only get it when you go to that country? What is it that's stopping us from doing that? And that's just one industry, that's just food processing. So, and the people who will make that happen are us, we, the leaders of private sector. No president, no minister is going to be able to make that happen. It is us being intentional about being Pan-African in our activities, in our actions, in our composition, that will make it such that we will then find those markets and create the jobs, quite frankly, for the countless Africans who are depending on us to create jobs for them.
Great, wonderful.
Catherine,
Yes,
yeah, let me just sort of add on to what Modupe says there. I think that one of the things that COVID has shown us is just the lack of real assertive conversations between the private sector and the government and the public sector as well. I think that one of the areas that perhaps we've not in the past addressed strongly is the area of social protection and health systems. And really being very assertive about this, because we've just seen through this COVID environment the disaster that is our health systems. A month ago, 20-something days ago, when the president said he could not open up the economy, he said, you know, the counties don't have enough beds for COVID patients. Therefore, I will, you know, hold you in your houses for another 30 days. And we are all waiting with a bated breath for the 6th of July to hear what he's going to be saying there. Now, why did it have to take us this long to realize that our health systems were actually that vulnerable, and also not adequate social protection mechanisms? So I think that this is a conversation, this is one of those conversations that we now must really put at the front in our discussions as a country and as countries, and I suspect that this is true across the continent.
Thank you, Martin. Vimal Shah, I can see you're on the line. I mean, you're one person who has worked hard to grow from an SME to a Pan-African organization. What would you say about vulnerability in leadership?
Hi, thanks, Catherine. I think it's important, in my opinion, to be vulnerable. I think authenticity and vulnerability go together. If you trust somebody, you can be authentic and you can be vulnerable. And I think that's where people get that effect and the feeling, because ultimately trust is built through emotional connect and also through the 4 things, right? It's integrity, intent, competency, and results. And I think a lot of people try and be somebody who they are not. And I think the fact is you should be who you are, in whatever circumstance. And try not to be somebody who you are not. And that's crucial. And therefore, saying the facts, if people are fearful in this time, it's better to say they're fearful. If they see the VUCA world, as Martin says, I think important to say, yep, I see volatility, I see uncertainty, I see complexity, and then people can talk to you very, very openly. So I think, again, employee-employer relationship should be there. Look, we have an issue, If I was Kenya, I was MD, I'd be talking to people and say, look, we have a real issue. And you can't just wash it away and say, yeah, I'm going to be strong and everything else. But it's a style. And I think that's where you require coaches of this sort who can actually show you the way to open up, not just to say, guys, I'm in trouble, I'm crying. I think there are ways and means, and that's why you need probably coaching. So thanks to Martin and Modupe for this nice talk.
Thank you very much. Martin, Modupe, I think there are a few more questions on the chat function. Would you like to respond to some of them?
Yeah, Modupe, why don't you take there's a question from Rosemary, which says, what are the gaps in skills?
What gaps do you see in leadership?
What gaps? What are the gaps in skills with leaders in Kenya as a result of? I guess she's referring to as a result of not having coaches or having very low level of coaching. What are the key unmet needs he's trying to address? As I mentioned, I think that. Coaching opens up new perspectives. Coaches, enables leaders to be more self-aware, gives them clarity in who they are, what the organization is, what kind of people they're leading, what the issues are. And actually, they bring the issues themselves to the table. The coach does not suggest any issue for you. You come to the table with the issues which are addressed. For example, if you saw the example that Modupe gave earlier on, he had planned a conference, the world had turned upside down. Therefore, how do I move from where I am? And that's where the space that coaching fills in. And so when you look at, when you ask about gaps in skills, leaders today, as part of resilience, we need to continuously learn. We need to continuously grow. That's the only way our economy, our businesses are going to grow, and hence the need for that.
There's a question about pleasing the boss phenomenon in the corporate world from Sylvester. Sylvester, when I was asked what my favorite leadership quote is, I said, leadership is cause, all else is effect. In other words, our responsibility as leaders is to take ownership for all outcomes. All outcomes. So in other words, if you have an organization in which people are only telling you good stuff, it's not because the people can only see good stuff. And it's not because the people are bad. It's because of something you are doing as the leader. So in other words, where you have that, we had, when my father has been an Anglican priest for about 20 years. Before that, he ran a multinational organization or two. And one of the things he used to do that used to really annoy me was after his sermons, he would come and say, so what did you think? And I would say, of course, it was great, Dad. Because the truth was half the time I wasn't listening. But then he would follow it up and he said, okay, great. So tell me 2 things you liked about it. And then tell me 2 things you think I could do better. Now, this is the one that really got me, because now you had to show that you were listening. Point I'm making here is that he, as the leader, did not allow me to get away with simple platitudes or positives. He asked the right questions. And when you have an organization where nobody's telling you anything that can be improved or anything that you've done wrong, that's a huge danger sign. So you need to, and it's not because the people don't see it. It's because for whatever reason, they either don't trust you, they're afraid, or you haven't created the space. You have to create the space. You have to ask the question, okay, this is great. So what are we not doing as well as we could? What can I do to be better? The first time you ask it, they may say, oh, boss, there's nothing, you are, in your infinite wisdom, there's nothing you can do better. By the time you've asked it 3 times, they will start to give you answers. Now, part of that also determines on how you respond to those answers. Because if you respond by punishing the messenger, then certainly nobody will give you more answers. So, but it all is based on what you have done. And Sylvester or anybody, if you are leading an organization that only tells you good things, don't look very far, look inward. Something you are doing or not doing is what is creating that situation and allowing it to continue.
Wonderful, thank you Modupe. Mr. Nabutola, I can see you have your hand up. Would you like to make a comment? Are you on mute?
Mute me? Okay.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Martin. I've known Martin for so long, forever almost. Well done, Martin. We are proud of you. And Modupe, well done. I think the 2 of you ran Africa for the time being.
Would you vote for us, Nabutola?
Definitely. The challenge, Martin, you talked about the lack of assertiveness by the private sector to government. In this country, I find it difficult because, especially in the formative years of KEPSA, it was like oh, by the way, we also have private sector. You know, so government would discuss all those things and they say, oh, by the way, we also have private sector. How do we turn that around so that they know who is paying the bills? How do we, without hurting anybody's ego? Because we do need it, particularly now when we are seeing the weakness of our health sector and even our food security is not quite in place. Is there some methodology that can be used? Thank you.
I would actually invite Vimal to comment on this actually, because Vimal has been involved in all these forums, including KEPSA and at the highest level of the National Economic Social Council, etc. So Vimal, do you want to make a comment on that?
Vima?
Or has he left? Yeah, well, I would say that, you know, KEPSA, there are areas where KEPSA has excelled, and we've seen some of that. And what would be of help is really to go back and look at our priorities, look at what COVID has shown us as our vulnerabilities as a country, and put those on top of the agenda, and begin to, or rather continue, a really accelerated engagement along those areas. There may have been priorities that we were following previously, but there are things which have popped up. And the fact is that, you know, this is not the last crisis we are seeing, and we should not be caught up the same way that we've been caught up by COVID. And this is perhaps not just our country, but across the world. But I would actually say that the reprioritization based on the learnings out of COVID is something that KEPSA needs to do.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Martin, maybe you can elaborate further on the distinct differences between coaching and mentorship. But before you do so, I see that Rose Magas has her hand up. Rose, would you like to make your comment?
Sure. I can be heard now.
Yes, you can.
Yes, I'm listening to the great speakers, and thank you for this particular forum. I know Martin talked about, and Modupe said the same thing, coaching is not a common phenomenon in Africa. And I think if you want to really see that, you have to look at our sports industry, where, I mean, we are not doing very well in sports, yet coaching is a daily one. We use coaches every day, so that already tells you that we don't even understand the concept of what coaching is and that. So that having been said, I think my question is, from your experience and from the coaching, what are those key elements that you need to look out in a coaching situation that then make coaching successful? Because I think we've not still understood what coaching is. And as I said, if you just want to understand that, sports is a mega industry around the world, and Africa is not getting, it's not getting even a portion of that particular industry, yet we have coaches every day in the sports industry. So thank you.
Thank you, Rose. And as you answer that, if I'm looking for a coach, Martin or Modupe, should I look for somebody who's like me, whose interests are like me, who is practically like me, or should I look for somebody who's, you know, like totally different from me?
Right. So let me take we can both talk to this actually, but let me just talk about coaching. As I mentioned earlier, so first of all, the difference between coaching and mentorship. So mentorship is very much a hand-holding activity. Mentors tend to be people who have walked the path before, people who have experienced certain things. So for example, I could mentor a CEO. You could come to me and say to me, Martin, you've been a CEO at KCB, and I'm just being appointed a CEO at Bank ABZ. So tell me how you run KCB and what worked and what didn't work. And let me go and do the same at my bank ABZ. And I would tell him how I started and how I did what and how I ended. And I would have regular conversations where I actually show him and he learns from my experience. Coaching, on the other hand, is a process, a partnership process where the coach facilitates a conversation here. The objective being that the client is going to create this solution for themselves. So rather than saying, you know, this is what I did, the coach will be asking the client the question, okay, so what do you want to get out of this? You know, where do you see this organization? What will success look like here? And the coach goes through a process where the client is thinking through the solutions and answering, and those are being probed, and solutions pop up. That is a basic definition around coaching. There's a partnership, there's a facilitation, there's solutions which are being generated by the client himself or herself in that case, as opposed to mentorship, which is, this is how I did it, go and do the same, and you'll see success. If I look at the question of what kind of coach should somebody have, coaches are trained. I mean, like any other profession, coaching is a profession. I know that there are many people who call them coaches, who call themselves but who may not have the necessary skills, you know, operate to the standards that have been set, and conform to the ethical considerations that have been established as well. I would say that you don't necessarily need a coach who is like you, because once you get into the coaching relationship, it's not about you looking like somebody else or even somebody being in your profession. So today, I coach engineers, I coach doctors, I coach scientists, I coach guys whose professions are farthest away from my original profession, and they see value out of it. Because there's a process to it. And in coaching, we say, trust the process. So there's a process to it. So what are you trying to achieve? What is the goal that you're trying to achieve? Where are you today? What will success look like for you? What are the obstacles that may stand in your way as you go through that process? What resources do you need to support you achieve this, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an established process which enables you to get where you want to. So whether I look like you, I look very, very different from you, is not necessarily a consideration. Although I find that people are attracted to people who they think they look like, and that's their default. But it doesn't need to be so. Modupe, what would you say?
I would say ditto. And recognizing that other people want to ask questions, I won't expand on that. Just the only thing I wanted to just add is this, you know, because somebody asked that you didn't touch on one thing about what people find what's lacking. A big part of what's lacking is too much ego. Why do I need a coach? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I have achieved? Do you realize who I am in this community? And it's almost as if, you know, the fact that you get a coach means that, you know, you were in remedial training. No. You know, for anybody who is a tennis fan, you know, Roger Federer, when he was #1, he had a coach. Did it mean that his coach was a better tennis player than Roger? No. But he recognized that he needed somebody to help him, even though he was #1, become even better. And that's the key for African CEOs, is that because we're surrounded by so many people who tell us how great we are and how, you know, and of course, 99% of them want something from us. So of course, they're going to tell us how we are awesome, excellent, infinite wisdom. Beautiful, boss. No, that thing you said. And so we start buying into it. And that's where stagnation starts. So for me, that's the big challenge for African CEOs, male or female. It's being intentional about becoming better.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions or comments that anyone would like to add? We just have a few minutes before we call for closing comments from both Martin and Modupe. John Nganga, would you like to speak? Okay, he's put his chat there. Right. Maybe at this juncture, Martin and Modupe, before I call on Victor to just make some closing remarks, is what are the two things you would recommend for leaders who are looking to build resilience, not just for themselves, but for their own teams as well? Two things that you would recommend for leaders who are looking to build resilience in their own personalities, but also for the teams that they lead?
I think, Catherine, you know, for me, for the organizations, I would say that given what we've experienced with COVID, a recognition that the world will never be the same again, and for organizations, therefore, for leaders to really relook at and question and challenge their business.
Give me my mirror.
Eva, please. Eva, please mute.
Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yes, I was talking about, you know, the fact that organizations or leaders should now really focus and look at their business models, because things have shifted dramatically. And therefore, for them to be resilient as organizations, to begin to look at whether yesterday's models can take them anywhere. If not, what do they do? So things like digitization that we spoke about earlier, things like looking for building the right talent and capabilities in the organizations, those will speak to resilience in terms of, from an organizational perspective. I think this is the time at an individual level where leaders need to be even more authentic than they have been before. I want to borrow the point that Modupe made, which is around this ego, which doesn't take us very far, believing in ourselves, you know, too much at the expense of everything else, and therefore being more authentic, being more inclusive in the way that we lead, because our teams are very rich in resources. Where we are stuck as leaders, we just need to ask, and the answer will be there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Modupe, do you want to add anything? Mm-hmm.
Yes, sure. So I think my two things would be, number one, to build resilience, get a coach. I cannot overemphasize that. And I've seen it. I'm not just, you know, I'm not selling coaching. I would not be where I am today if it had not been for the services of coaches. I cannot overemphasize it, because in those dark areas, those dark times that sometimes we create for ourselves, but sometimes are created on us, it's really important. The second one is faith. Again, with apologies to those who don't believe in God, I believe that my faith has been very instrumental in helping me get over the fear that sometimes debilitates and diminishes one's resilience. Because ultimately, when you're going through these tough times, you know, that require resilience, it's fear is what can cripple you and almost freeze you and prevent you from moving forward or taking those decisions or those actions. And so having faith and tapping into whatever the source of your faith is, you know, for everybody's got their source of faith, but really, really tap into it. Because you see, the thing about leadership is, especially transformational, it's so easy to talk about. You know, it's like, oh yes, we all want to be transformed. But if you think about it, transformational leadership is the prospect of taking people from what they're sure of and they're comfortable with into a future that you think is better, but you have no guarantees. And it's that fear of the unknown that makes a lot of companies not make that move and a lot of leaders not take that move. Now, sometimes we're blessed with things like COVID that force us out of that, but other times we're not. And there's a reason why today Amazon is bigger than Sears or Walmart, even though they had bigger IT departments when it started. Or today, University of Phoenix is a bigger educational institution than Harvard or Cambridge or Stanford, even though 40 years ago they had bigger IT departments. Or today, why Uber is bigger than Yellow Cab or Airbnb is bigger than many hotel chains. It's because these companies, these leaders saw or were apprised of a potential future, but they were afraid. And so they didn't move. And the other leaders said, we're moving. So tap into faith. Those are the two things. Number one, get a coach. Number two, find your faith.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Modupe. I have so many takeaways. Poor leadership leads to death. Leaders need courage. Coaching will help you become the best leader you can be. Coaching has an ROI. What has worked for us in the past is not what will work for us in the future. And therefore, the importance of ensuring that we are on top of our own leadership skills. The pace of change is very, very fast. We need to keep up to speed. There is importance in attaching purpose and meaning to organizations. So you're not just looking at organizations for profit, but you're looking at why were they put there in the first place? Why do they exist in the first place? What is their purpose? New talent, the new talent landscape means that we need to tap into ourselves and find ways of managing the new types of talent that we have now. Leaders need to focus on sustainability. Intentional leadership is critical. Transformational leadership is important. Tapping into faith, as Modupe has said. And lastly, as leaders, we have fears, but there's nothing wrong with being fearful. It is how you move, you overcome that fear and become courageous to leading the rest of the team. And I think one of the most powerful ones that I've taken away today is that vulnerability in leadership is a good thing. I think that was so powerful for me. And so I want to give both of you just a minute to make your closing remarks before I invite Victor to close for us. Thank you. Shall I start with you, Modupe?
Thank you very much. I'm a Sierra Leonean, but I'm a Pan-African because, you know, I went to school, my parents were missionaries. We went to school in Ghana, Kenya, and Sierra Leone. And I don't believe that it was orchestrated by accident. Kenya, in many ways, is a leading country in Africa. And the rest of Africa looks to Kenya to lead for many things. Similarly, when it comes to the private sector, many people in Africa look to Kenya. And I know that Kenyans may say, oh, you know, there are so many things that are not right and you want to downcry, but that's the fact. Smaller countries look to you. And my appeal to you, the leaders of business in Kenya, is to not be satisfied with what you have achieved so far. It's wonderful, but it's nowhere near enough. Because we're not in business just so that we can put bacon on our tables on Sunday. Most of us are at the stage where, frankly, we need to eat less bacon, if we're honest. We're in business now so that our grandchildren can be assured of bacon, and not our biological grandchildren, but the grandchildren of people who today are born in slums can have that. For that to happen, we need to build companies, institutions that are multinational, that are growing and can grow way past the day that somebody is crying about how we have left this earth. Those decisions about whether we create companies that 100 years from now will still be around and will be multinational are going to be made today by us. And if we decide otherwise, then yes, we will have companies that will build us our 2 or 3 houses, and within 10 to 15 years after we die, they will be gone, and nobody will even know that they existed. That's up to us. It's not up to any president. It's not up to the AU. It's up to us, because leadership is cause. Everything else is the effect. And my challenge to you, the CEOs of Kenya, is to not be satisfied with what you have achieved thus far, but to challenge yourselves to build the multinationals that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, will make African graduates of African universities say, me, I want to go and work for so-and-so company. It's in our control. We can make it happen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Leadership is cause, everything else is effect. Martin.
Catherine, I don't want to, to dilute that very strong statement, extremely well delivered by Modupe, by adding anything to it. Suffice to say that go out and get a coach for yourself. Embed coaching in your organization as a way of life so that you can enjoy the great advantages that this brings to yourself. And if you need more information, do come to us at ICF Kenya, International Coach Federation. We've got more than 100 coaches who will lead you along this journey. But also something which Modupe didn't say, Modupe doesn't like marketing, but also go into the website of Breakfast Club Africa and do find out more about it and how you can benefit as a leader by being a member of Breakfast Club Africa. Let me leave you with the old words of Charles Darwin. You know, the days when we were being taught about evolution. So Charles Darwin is one of those guys who said it is not the strongest species that survives, nor the one most intelligent, but the most responsive to change is the one that survives. I think COVID has put us in a place where we don't have any alternative but to change our ways and move forward. Stay safe, and thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you both Martin and Modupe. On behalf of the Governance and Leadership Committee of KEPSA, we are indeed grateful that you ran this session for us. Victor, over to you. Victor?
Yes, hi, Catherine.
Yep.
It's been a wonderful session for me. Hi, I hope you can hear me. I don't know whether my connection is good.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, I want to really thank Martin and Modupe. I didn't expect to get what I have received today. I was listening in, I logged in because I organized this, of course, with Catherine's guidance. But like many people who are like me, who really have not understood the value of coaching, we hear about mentorship. We know what it is. What is this thing called coaching? And how it was titled, how the webinar was titled, Resourcefulness. Then I said, okay, maybe this is it promises to be an interesting topic and from great speakers. For the respect I have for Martin Oduor and now the new, I read about Modupe and I said, wow, I think we have great speakers. And I think they've really done justice to this. They've really done justice. I must say, in fact, I just posted in one of the platforms that I have organized webinars for 3 months. And this one was the top one in terms of the value that is generated. I really want to thank the two great speakers. And I'm thinking we didn't even have enough time for all this, but maybe it was sweeter when it is short. And you've given us enough appetite, Martin and Modupe, to really go and think through, do a self-reintrospection and just see what is it we can do at a personal level to build ourselves within our institutions to integrate coaching as integral to this business strategy in our institutions. Coaching as part and parcel of the personal development of our employees. But I kept on wondering, I know there are mentors, the people who call me, Victor has been my mentor, but I rarely come across coaches, right? I rarely come across coaches. And I think many organizations are actually vulnerable to failure because they do not have trained coaches within the organization. And I think this is something I would really vouch for boards, different boards, to start inculcating coaching within the organizations that they lead to be part and parcel of their business strategy. I really think there's gonna be a lot of value if we do that. The new skills that you can get, I had asked a question about the difference between mentoring and coaching, and Martin brought it out so well, right? A coach would help you develop, teach you new skills with a clear learning path. You have to define what is it you want to do? What would success look like? Then they help you through to solve those problems in new ways that are amazing. They help you answer questions that might have been so confusing to you as a leader in an organization during the coaching session. So I think that is something that is of high value. And I'm just wondering, Catherine, where do we go, or where do we go from here? This is a message we really have to take back to the Governance and Leadership Committee that you chair. I posted a message on that committee WhatsApp group that you guys have missed a lot for those who are not able to join. So I think we are waiting the appetite, but I think we need to see if in the near future we can have another opportunity, a similar opportunity. I would really want many of the CAPSA leaders to listen to these two great gentlemen speak to them. So easy. It comes out so naturally and like, okay, they didn't even have to refer to anything. It is in them. And I've gained a lot of trust, right, at a personal level, because one of the things that most leaders lack is self-trust. And that is a major, a very, very bad weapon if you can't have trust in yourself. And coaches like Oduor would help you build self-trust. And that is a very big asset in leadership. So just to say two more things as we close this. Where do we get coaches in Kenya? I mean, Martin, you're in ICF. How many like you are there? How many like you are there, so that we can begin to attach ourselves to some of them and say, okay, I'm looking for a coach, I'm struggling with ABCD, and I think I need different contacts. So that's something we hope that we can come back to you. I have your phone number, I have your email address, but I think everyone else needs that. Modupe mentioned something, was it Modupe who was
We lost
reporting
Victor.
into him, and yes.
Okay.
I see you had 20 people reporting to him, and how much of a stress that was.
Martin.
And the value of decluttering your in-tray so that you begin to start thinking strategically and delegating work and trusting. You know, sometimes leaders get burnout and they can't think strategically because number one, they do not have trust in the people they have delegated work to. All right. So I think coaching also helps you to build trust in your team because you know the team that you're entrusting with responsibilities have undergone certain trainings. You've coached them and you've seen them through difficult moments, how they make decisions on their own. Sometimes you just take a back seat. And I think that is quite valuable. Let me not talk a lot and dilute whatever the two great gentlemen have said. So let's find out, Catherine, how we can have, how we can transfer this value to the KEPSA leadership at a board level, how to market this particular idea, because I believe they'll find it quite useful. We had some of the KEPSA leaders here. I mean, they can attest to the value of today's webinar, and that it's actually going to be useful to have a repeat, even if we just have it for board members and the governing council. We just say, for this particular one, it's going to be a closed meeting for boards, for our board and the governing council, because they lead different sectors. They lead different organizations. Yeah, so thanks a lot. And vulnerability is a good thing in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I take that away with me.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Asante sana. And for those of you on the call and you're not KEPSA members, please think through it. It's really valuable to become a KEPSA member. We want to welcome you, and we should be able to receive you. Join KEPSA and you'll get a lot of great stuff. Thanks a lot. And I wish you all a good evening.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
Victor, for putting it together.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.